Hello and welcome back. It is Wednesday, August 29th, 2018. And this, my friends, is the A-Side Live Chat podcast, or the S&M podcast for all you freaks out there. My name is Shaun Al-Shatti, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. As always, I am joined by my co-host, my good friend, the birthday boy himself. Where once sat a boy, now sits a man. I think he's old enough to rent a car now, maybe? Mr. Marc Raimondi. Happy birthday, Marc. How are things?
Well, let me just clarify a few things, Shaun. First of all, my birthday was yesterday.
Oh.
So let's not even delve into that whole thing. And I've been old enough to rent a car for quite some time now. But aside from these boyish looks, despite these boyish looks, I am actually a man of 34 years old. I know that's hard to believe, but that is my age. That is my age. I'm a real boy, man.
You seem so unexcited for this birthday.
I'm just over I mean, why are we doing birthdays? I'm in my mid-30s, man. Like, this is just not, it just shouldn't be a thing anymore. Let's just move on. I'd rather forget about it. I don't want a reminder every year of how old I'm getting. Like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. I mean, it's just, I'm just too old. I'm just too old for birthdays. I don't think, see, when you're younger, it's like every year is like a big deal. It's a celebration. You feel special on your birthday. And then maybe when you get older, it's like, hey, I made another year. That's amazing. This is great news. But when you're in that middle range, no, I'm just over it. I don't need it. I'm good. Let's just move on. I worked all day yesterday. I'm going to work all day today. And then tomorrow, I'm going to treat myself and go to Chicago for a little pro wrestling.
All right. Well, as someone who is, I mean, my next one's my 30th, so I completely understand where you're coming from. I'm not looking forward to that. So let's not waste any time. Let's move on because there is a ton to discuss today. UFC Lincoln is behind us, and now UFC 228 is next. Tyron Woodley versus Darren Till. That's a week away, man, and a lot of questions going to be answered in Dallas. Also, for anybody that cares, I mean, the Ultimate Fighter 28, it kind of crept up on us. That's starting tonight. Robert Whittaker and Kelvin Gastelum. The series keeps on going. Again, I don't know if anybody cares, but it's there. We also have PFL and Invicta this week as well. But as always, I mean, this is your show, guys. So we will talk about whatever you guys want us to talk about. You can ask us a question in the MMA Fighting page below in the comments section. Any question that gets 3 recommendations will turn green, and those are going to get priority. You can also ask us a question on Twitter using the hashtag the A-Side or Chat Rappers. And as always, again, a replay of this podcast will be up immediately following the show on YouTube and an audio-only version on SoundCloud. As for iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, I mean, as we've been saying, those are in the works, and we've actually been told that should be good to go next month. So we are definitely looking forward to that. As always, 1% better every time. But in the meantime, let's get to the goods, Marc. Let's dive right into these questions. What's up first?
All right. First question from the MMAfighting.com comments section from the Empire 91. What happens if Till misses weight? Sup, guys. Till's open workout / media scrum did not give me confidence that him making weight is a sure thing. If he misses the mark, what are the UFC's options? Woodley has said he will not fight Usman. Does the UFC book a fight where Woodley can retain with the win? And is it just normal win for Till? That seems to be the only viable option given the time frame. What happens if they choose that option and Till does indeed win?
Well, hey, Empire, I can tell you that you're not alone there, man. I covered Darren Till's workout yesterday. That was in Las Vegas, and I covered it with my boy Pete Caro, who, by the way, I might add, is the host of the new Eurobash podcast on the fast-growing MMA Fighting Podcast Network. You guys should check that out if you haven't already. It's good stuff. But either way, I mean, me and Pete, we were covering that yesterday, and it's funny because at the beginning, you know, we're texting, we're just talking, and I was telling him I just had kind of like the sneaking, one of those gut feelings you get before a fight where I kind of like had that feeling Darren Till was about to pull off something special next week in Dallas, maybe shock the world a little bit. But man, I don't know if I could be further from that by the end of that workout. It was strange. And I want to preface all of this by saying, I mean, we literally only saw like a very small window into the dog days of probably what is, you know, the very hard time in his fight camp. It is very possible he could have had just been having a bad day, and he even said as much. But boy, he looked sluggish out there, man. Like he looked tired. He looked drained. And that was still 10 days out from weigh-ins. And you're right, Empire. I mean, he didn't inspire confidence at all that he'll be able to make that championship weight next Friday, because that's what he's gonna have to make, like 170 pounds. That's a target he's only hit, I think, 2 out of his 6 UFC appearances. Obviously, there's the 1 pound allowance, so he hasn't needed to hit that. But I mean, that's a target that's been hard for him. But man, he hasn't even fought for the welterweight title, and he is already openly talking about his plans to move to middleweight, really out of need more than anything, out of necessity. I know Darren Till likes being the bigger man, but at what point are the diminishing returns, right? Like, at what point is this just hurting him? He is 25 years old, and he is legitimately like a massive dude. Like, I'm 6 foot, maybe 6'1" on a good day, maybe about like 165 or 195 pounds. I'm sorry. I've stood next to Darren Till, man, and he just like towered over me. And it wasn't even like with height, because we're about the same height. It's just like the thickness of that dude. Like, he is a big, very thick man who has like really broad shoulders. To me, it's crazy that he makes 170. I feel like there's probably going to be a day where we look back and just marvel at how he did it, Anthony Johnson style. And I mean, we all saw that video when he was, seemingly going blind temporarily while cutting weight. And the thing is, like, I think you see this guy with guys as they get older, right? Like, as they reach this age. Max Holloway is a good example. I mean, he just turned 26 last December. He's getting older. His body's maturing. The damage of these like crazy cuts, that stuff is cumulative, man. Like, it builds up. It does not go away. Another example, I mean, Anthony Johnson, he always had a really big cut, but he was okay for the most part, right until he hit that mid-20s. Then the same thing started to happen. At some point, I feel like the damage is done, and these dudes' bodies just start saying, I don't want to do this anymore, man. Like, this isn't good for me. And it seems like Darren knows that he's kind of fast approaching that point, if he's not already there altogether. I mean, again, he hasn't even fought for the title, man. And he is already openly talking about his future is at middleweight. So I guess to go back to the question, you hope it doesn't happen. You hope he makes weight, and you hope everything's fine. But after yesterday, man, I can't help but wonder what kind of condition he'll be in Saturday, even if he does make weight. And I know Tyron has already said that he won't fight Kamaru if that happens. So we'll see if he sticks to his guns on that. Maybe the UFC can sweeten the pot enough to change his mind. But otherwise, it would just be a normal fight, man. It would just be a normal fight that won't count as a title defense, even if Woodley wins, to answer, I guess, your question. I mean, think back to Anderson Silva versus Travis Lutter. Like, that's something like that, where Anderson won, but it didn't actually count to his title defense streak because Lutter missed weight by like 7 pounds or something like that.
This is the bet the UFC has made, though, right? I mean, this is what they've decided to do. They gave Darren Till the title shot, and now this is what we have to deal with. We have to deal with the questions about whether or not he can make the weight. And it didn't look good yesterday, as you said, man. Like, he's not even in the tough part of his weight cut yet. He's not even in those. He's not in the sauna yet. He's not in the bathtub yet. He's not quite at that point yet where he's cutting the water weight. He's just dieting right now, hopefully. And we're still over a week away. So it is super concerning. And the whole situation with Woodley and Usman, and it could be that Woodley is just saying that he won't fight Usman to possibly get some more money out of the UFC. That is certainly a possibility. But can you blame Woodley if he does not want to fight Usman on 1 day notice after preparing his entire camp for Darren Till? I mean, you're talking about 2 completely different styles. It's not even close. It's not even in the same ballpark of what both of those guys bring to the table. So to me, you can't blame Woodley for not wanting to fight Usman if it comes down to that. Now, Robert Whittaker, the UFC middleweight champion, had a lunch on Monday here in LA. Very illuminating quotes from him, I thought. We don't usually get I mean, during fight week, Whittaker is usually pretty stoic, doesn't talk about a whole lot of stuff, but he kind of went off on the idea of backup fighters. He said it was silly. He said he pretty much said that he would not want to fight a backup fighter, but he also said when you're in that position as a champion or as someone who did make weight and is in that position where you're ready to fight, it's no choice at all. You really have no choice. You kind of have to fight whatever the fight is because you've paid money for the camp. You've gone through the whole camp. You need to get paid. These guys don't get paid unless they fight for the most part. So I think Woodley probably, at the end of the day, depending on what happens with Till, probably will fight whoever the UFC wants him to fight. And I hope it's Darren Till. I hope he makes weight. I hope this is all a moot point. But I have grave concerns about where this could be headed. I think we could be looking at next week just a mess on weigh-in day. Who is Tyron Woodley going to fight? That shouldn't be the question. It should never be who is the champion going to fight next week. Like, that should never be a question. But that is literally a question that we're looking at in the next 10 days. Who is Tyron Woodley going to actually fight in the main event of UFC 228? It's ridiculous.
It's very ridiculous, man. And again, I think it really is something to be said about, like, these guys, they reach a certain point in their career. Again, it's always the mid-20s where it's just this stuff builds and builds and builds. You even saw it with Conor, where at a certain point he was just not going to make featherweight anymore, and it was around that same age. Darren Till's reaching that point, man, and I genuinely don't know how this dude does it to begin with. But I feel the fact that he is so just open about how he is going to middleweight and that's his future division. What does that say about what we're doing here? Just giving this guy a middleweight or a welterweight title shot. Like, let's say he wins. Are we going to be in a situation a year from now where it's a vacated title again?
It really should have just been Usman getting the title shot all along. I mean,
or Covington or somebody.
Or wait for Covington, but I understand they needed to fill a spot in the main event of UFC 228, and Covington wasn't ready. Whitaker also, speaking of Whitaker, had something very interesting to say to your point about when you reach that mid-20s and you're in a weight class when you're essentially a teenager. He was saying that his last fight at welterweight was against Mike Rhodes in Australia. He said he cut 7.5 kilos the morning of the fight. That's over 16 pounds. The morning of the weigh-ins. The morning of weigh-ins, he did over 16 pounds of a water cut. And he said that camp, he was like ready to call Joe Silva and say, like, I can't even fight in MMA anymore. He was ready to quit the entire sport if he had to continue cutting to 170. And that sounds an awful lot like what we heard from Darren Till yesterday, right? I mean, he didn't go out and say, I'm going to quit the sport, but he was miserable. And when I was watching Till yesterday, it reminded me of that media scrum with Whitaker on Monday about how he was just ready to call it quits because it was just too brutal on his body. And I don't think, win or lose, I don't think Darren Till's ever going to fight at 170 again after this fight. He might not fight at 170 next week. So I think it's all silly. It should have just been Woodley versus Usman. I think this is a huge mistake. All respect to Till. I think he deserves it again from a merit standpoint. I think he's a great fighter, but 170 is probably not his weight class. I think even he would probably admit that at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. And it also, I mean, illustrates to me the huge gap. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but the huge gap between 170 and 185, man. Like, there is room there for 65 and 75 so that there's like a less of a gap between that because the talent is there. You can fill those divisions. But yeah, I mean, like you said, I hope he makes weight. I hope this is all a moot point, and I hope this is just all stressing for nothing. But this is the bed the UFC's made, right? This is when you give a title shot to a guy who missed 170 by that much in his last fight. This is kind of the discussion we're going to have. Moving on.
Next question here from an interesting username, UFC Nutter for Life on the MMAfighting.com comment section. WME era. Hey guys, what are your thoughts on the WME era in comparison to the Fertitta era, as opposed to, I guess, the Machida era? Shaun, your thoughts on Endeavor being the UFC's owner for the last it's over 2 years now, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that was UFC 200, so that was summer 2016. So we're past the 2-year mark. I mean, this is a topic we've talked about to death, so I won't belabor it too much, but I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, the differences between the two now that we're this immersed into them, right? Like, it really is whatever's the next big thing, they're just going to do it. Influx of interim titles, all of these different things that have sort of devalued, I guess, the regular, well, I guess, I don't know how to articulate what I'm saying, but have devalued sort of the height of what this is, of what this could be, of in terms of like, here's what this title means. Let's all gather around this title, and this is the greatest, as opposed to now here's 80 billion different titles. That being said, I mean, Endeavor has the ESPN deal was a big deal for them. They made a lot of money on that ESPN deal, and ultimately, if they were to sell right now, I'm sure that's going to be a big boon for them. So there's hits and misses. Probably more hits on the business side. But in terms of the actual product, I think I wouldn't be alone in saying that the product has suffered.
I think that the Fertitta era there are different eras within that Fertitta era, if that makes any sense. There was a point in time where UFC, Zuffa, the Fertitta brothers were investing a ton of money into the sport without the chance for an immediate return, without the chance for a short-term return. And at some point that changed to, we're going to build this to eventually sell. And that was the era where Reebok came in and USADA came in, and they tried to make it a more professional looking product so that they could eventually sell. And it's pretty clear, especially looking back now in hindsight, that's what they were trying to do. They were preparing to put this up for sale and make a boatload of money, and they did. And it was, I think they're geniuses. They got out at the very height of what the UFC was at that point. Now Dana White is saying the UFC is worth $7 billion. I don't think that sounds right. That sounds like some promoters speak to me, but I'm not in the business world. But that sounds like a bit much. And I don't know how much people say the WME era, the Endeavor era. I don't really know how much Ari Emanuel is really texting Dana White saying, "Oh, we need this fight on this card." I don't know how much that is really happening. I think it's more of this is a Dana White show, and this is also a Hunter Campbell show. Let's not forget him. He's making a lot of deals. He is the go-to guy for a lot of people. A lot of people don't know that name. He doesn't do any media. He doesn't really talk too much. He's not a public figure, but Hunter Campbell is the guy behind the scenes. He's kind of what Lorenzo used to be. He's the general counsel of the UFC, but he's kind of the guy on the other side of the deal, where Dana's on one side, the fighters and managers on the other side, and Hunter Campbell is kind of like, maybe, I guess, the good cop in some cases to Dana's bad cop. That was kind of Lorenzo's role in making like the big deals. So I think that more than in the Endeavor era, I think it's more of this is a Dana White, Hunter Campbell. They're kind of putting their mark on the UFC now. And the difference is really the lack of Lorenzo and kind of Hunter Campbell in there, and a little bit of influence from, I guess, Ari Emanuel and Patrick Whitesell. But again, I don't know if those guys have a million businesses. They have a million things going on. I don't know how much they're really calling Dana and saying, "Hey, we need, Elias Theodoro on the Toronto card." I don't think that's really happening all that much.
Yeah, and Hunter Campbell is the lawyer guy that Dana always
I like how Dana just calls him the lawyer. Meanwhile, he's really the guy that all these managers and all these fighters at the top level are talking to make deals. He's just the lawyer, though, I guess.
Yeah. Well, hey, moving on to next question coming from Matt the Dunk, who asks about UFC Lincoln, James Vick. Where does he go from here? Full disclosure, I'm a hater, he writes. But where does Vick go from here? For a long time, I felt like he is a fighter that I've been told as a hardcore fan I should really like. But here we are. His record is fantastic on paper, but when he's been matched up with top-level talent like Gaethje, Chiesa, Dariush, he's been finished in under 2 rounds. Dude's 31 years old, so we can't really call him a young prospect. Who would y'all like to see him fight next, and do you think he can turn it around?
It's a good question. I think James Vick for a while has been a guy that has been asking for opportunities, and he has gotten some of those opportunities, like our friend said in the comment section there, Donk Donkerson. And when he's gotten those opportunities, he has not quite cashed in on them, and Saturday was the latest example. Here he is. He's in a main event fight. He's got Justin Gaethje. It's a big spot for him. If he wins, who knows? He can go pretty far up in the lightweight rankings if he's able to beat Justin Gaethje, especially if he does so in a dominant way and he loses by knockout in the first round. So he had the opportunity and he couldn't cash in, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just, not everyone can reach that pinnacle, and it may be that at the age of 31, James Vick kind of settles into more of a gatekeeper role in the division, but you never know. Rafael Dos Anjos was kind of in that role at one point at lightweight, and he became the UFC champion. So you just never know when guys can turn it on. I don't think he's necessarily a late bloomer. I still think he's a very good fighter. I still think he's a top 15 fighter in the world, which is nothing to sneeze at. But again, not everyone can achieve the top 5 and the title. So if he settles into more of a gatekeeper, kind of like mid-level ranking guy, that's fine too. But that is, according to what we've seen so far, that's kind of where James Vick falls in that division.
Yeah, that was a big one for him, because like this commenter said, he's gotten 2 shots at guys that I think we all consider, top 15 type of guys, and top 10 type of guys, I guess. And none of them have looked very good at this point. And I wonder at this point, if I'm James Vick, I'm very much considering 170. Just to reinvent yourself, go try something new, but also B, I mean, he is such a big dude. He is a 6'3" lightweight. There is so much more. I feel like he is shorting himself by cutting down as much as he is. And this is another guy where maybe a 65 division would really help him out. If he was able to go instead of maybe 70 to 65 and compete with those guys, I feel like that's probably his optimal weight class. But if it was me, man, I'm going to 170 if I'm James Vick.
I mean, I think you're right. And he's a guy that's been saying 165 before it was cool. Before everyone was saying 165, James Vick was saying 165. So if it happens, he's certainly a prime candidate for it. We'll move on to our next question from the MMA Fighting website from Brian Billings. Jake Ellenberger retirement. Any thoughts on Ellenberger's abrupt retirement? Did he stick around too long? Any memories? I will just say before you go, I don't think it was an abrupt retirement. I think there were people that were expecting it, but go ahead, Shaun.
Yeah, and it was actually, I mean, it's weird the way this game works out, right? Because the same person who retired his brother, his twin brother, retired him. Brian Barberina is basically like public enemy number one in the Ellenberger household at this point. He's retired both of the twin brothers. This is a bizarre game, man. But hey, I mean, I feel like maybe newer fans who came along when Conor was on his rise, they probably don't have a good sense of who Jake Ellenberger was. I mean, this is a guy who was in the IFL, for God's sake. I mean, he was going since like 2005. He had a long career before he even began in the UFC. And the way he started in the UFC, I mean, I think his first UFC fight, maybe lost to Carlos Condit, but then he went through a just crazy run where he was just touching guys and knocking them out. And he looked legitimately great for a while. I mean, he destroyed Jake Shields in a matter of like a minute, something like this. There was a very real moment where Jake Ellenberger was one of the guys on the precipice of he never got that title shot, but he was one of the top 5 welterweights in the world for a while. And you know, it was difficult seeing his decline, but I think ultimately, I mean, he goes out having a career that is very successful in the long haul. And I mean, he's still relatively young too. Like, he's only 33. He's one of those guys where his fight years are far surpassing his actual age. So he still has time to do whatever he wants to do in life. He had a great career, and I think he had a great career that a lot of people would be envious to be able to last this long and do as many great things as he did.
Not only was he a top 5 welterweight for a long period of time, but he was also one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC. I mean, he was almost like a Gaethje type, where maybe not at that level where you can kind of count on him to have an exciting fight every single time. But if you look back at some of those old Ellenberger fights against Diego Sanchez, I mean, these were unbelievable fights. If you guys, for the newer fans out there who have Fight Pass, go back and watch some of the old Jake Ellenberger fights, because first of all, the guy could crack. The guy could absolutely knock you out with one punch, but he could also be in like these crazy bloody wars. Look, first of all, great guy. I mean, talking about class act, former Marine. And I mean, did he hold on a little bit too long? You could possibly say that, but it's really hard to say. Look at the guys that he's fought, though. It isn't like he was losing to chumps. He was losing to Wonder Boy and Safadine and Robbie Lawler and Mike Perry and Masvidal. He was losing to top 10, top 15 guys pretty much every single time. And his last 2 losses were against Saunders and Barberina, and they're not really top 15 guys at this point. So I think maybe that was kind of his signal to go, but it's hard to say when it's too long. I do think that the knockouts kind of the knockout losses kind of added up. And I am glad to see. I don't want to see him take any more damage, because he's a good guy, and he's always been so welcoming to the media. And, you know, I've talked to him a bunch of times, and he's always been a good guy. And you don't want to see his quality of life down the road kind of deteriorate by all, you know, getting knocked out is no joke. Yeah.
I mean, I remember the lead up to the Jake Shields fight. Jake Ellenberger had won maybe like 3 or 4 in a row, a lot of them by knockout. But still, nobody really knew who he was. He wasn't really getting a push, and he started making a bunch of noise and calling out Jake Shield and doing all this social media trash talk before that was really a thing. And then I feel like Jake Shields was so dismissive of him, and just the MMA fan base in general was so dismissive of him. Then he comes in there and wrecks him in like 53 seconds. And then, like you said, the Diego Sanchez one's right after that, and that was a crazy fight. That was one of the first fights on Fuel at Fuel TV, the old Fuel TV, and that was just a gnarly fight, man. I think I do think one of you mentioned the knockout losses. That was those things accumulate, those things add up. I also don't think he was helped by sort of in the middle of maybe the waning years of his prime years, going and training at Glendale Fight Club under the legendary Edmund Tarverdian. That probably didn't help him. That kind of maybe sped his decline. But ultimately, like I said, ultimately he had a really solid career. If there was he's obviously not a Hall of Famer by any means, but if there was a Hall of Good or a Hall of Very Good, he makes it into there for sure.
He was one of those guys that when Rain Training Center in Orange County, California closed down, he was one of those guys kind of left without a country, so to speak. And so he ended up at Glendale Fighting Club. He kind of bounced around to a bunch of gyms, but he had probably the best success of his career at Rain Training Center with Marc Munoz down there.
Yeah, very much so. So let's move on. We now move to Robin G, 1987, who asks, oh, this is the Marc Raimondi special. The lack of knowledge in MMA rules by the media and commenters. He writes, how in the world is it possible that most media outlets and other people earning money with MMA, commenters, etc., are not aware of the MMA rules? At the UFC fights last weekend, the new rules were in place. That means a fighter is grounded if he has 2 feet and 2 hands on the floor. Why is there mass confusion if the knockout from Eric Anders was barely legal, while in fact it was nowhere near illegal since his hand was off the ground for several seconds? I have had the pleasure of being in the Slack room or in the media room, wherever, with Marc Raimondi during fight nights, and he goes ballistic for this type of thing. So I will give this one to you, my friend. What is your opinion on this?
Honestly, like I feel like I've beaten this dead horse for years now about the lack of knowledge of rules and scoring criteria by commentators. I mean, I've been writing about this for literally years, and I can't even like bring myself to do that anymore because it's just so frustrating. There was a great article last week by Arash Markazi from ESPN. He went and did John McCarthy's referee and judge certification course in July during International Fight Week. And it was very illuminating to see another. I've never done John's full course, but I've done his seminar that he did for the press a couple of years ago. And I've also talked to him, God, dozens of times about rules and regulations, as well as everyone else, a lot of other people in the space about rules and regulations and judging criteria. But it was enlightening. And I was heartened to see that another reporter went and did that course, because a lot of people don't know the rules and a lot of people don't take these courses. I think that it would be great for a Paul Felder or anyone, especially one of the new guys who are coming up, a Dominic Cruz, to go and take a John McCarthy course or a Herb Dean course. Any one of these guys who does the ABC certification courses. I think that would be fantastic, because it would be, look, I think these guys are great when it comes to the fights. They're great when it comes to the analysis. They're second to none, really. They're phenomenal at breaking down what is going on in the cage as far as the two fighters go. But when it comes to what's going on with the referee and what's going on with the judges, there is a lot of lacking there, and they pass off often information that is incorrect to the viewers, and then that information that is incorrect gets adopted by the viewers as their own line of thinking, and that's how we have people screaming about robberies and judging when it really wasn't a robbery at all, but they were told something one time by a commentator on TV, and that's what they now know about judging. I mean, that is a lot of, in most cases, the knowledge that fans have about judging and about refereeing and about the rules and regs comes directly from the commentators on television. It's not coming from me and you. They're not looking at MMAfighting.com. Most people are just watching the broadcast. They're not going on the websites. They're not going and reading John McCarthy's Twitter. They're getting information from Dominic Cruz and Daniel Cormier and Paul Felder and Joe Rogan, especially. And if that information is wrong, that still becomes part of their knowledge of MMA, and they think it's correct. So I would love if one of these guys or all these guys go to John McCarthy's command course, his certification course, learn about the rules. And this situation is a perfect example of it. Nebraska has adopted the new unified rules of MMA. Now, let me also say it's a little bit confusing right now because there are different rules in different states. We all know that. I've written about this and talked about this
ridiculous
ad nauseum. We don't have to go into that, but in Nebraska, they've adopted the new rules. It's a different definition of a grounded fighter. You need to have both palms or both fists down on the ground to be considered grounded. To have a kick or a knee to the head be considered illegal. Tim Williams only had one hand down. It's Nebraska. It's the new rules. You can kick a dude in the head with only one hand down in Nebraska and other states who adopted the new rules. So in this case, that was nowhere near being an illegal knee. That was as clean as a kick as could be. If it were somewhere else, if it were in Nevada, who has not adopted the new rules, then it would have been close to being illegal. But because it was in Nebraska and they have the new rules, it was absolutely 100% clean and not even close to being illegal.
It's just so I can't get over the fact that there are different rules in different places still. This is how long I mean, you know better than anybody. How long ago were the new rules decided? About a year ago?
It's been over 2 years now.
There you go.
It's been over 2 years since they've been implemented.
And yet every different location, every different place the UFC travels or Bellator or wherever, it's going to be a different rule set. And no one has that memorized. No one knows what the rules are going to be. There are instances, the guys are told on the day of, and there are instances where, I mean, you covered one, I think recently, where a fighter was told a certain rule set was in place at the beginning of the night. And then that rule set switched halfway through the night because no one was actually clear on it.
That was in Boston. That was in Boston for UFC 220.
Yeah,
where they didn't know which rules were being used. The fighters were told the early fighters were told one thing, and then in the middle of the event, it went back to the old rules. So there were actually two different rule sets being used in the same event on a UFC pay-per-view.
That's like the highest level of this sport. That cannot be happening. That's just not a function of a sport that functions in any way, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. And it's frustrating because if you talk to fighters just on a fight week or wherever outside of fight week, a lot of them don't know the difference, man. Like a lot of them don't have any real understanding of this because why would they? There's no one's coming to them and telling them this. They're not calling into their local commissions to find out the nuances of the rules. They just assume that these are the rules and I'm going to work under these rules because that's how it should work. That's how a sport works. It's ridiculous that it doesn't, man. And it's interesting because, I mean, you're mentioning all the commenters, right? Like a Dominic Cruz or a Paul Felder or a Daniel Cormier. Joe Rogan does this as well, but I mean, he's not a fighter. But all those guys you mentioned other than Rogan, those are all fighters. And they're getting this confused at times in the moment. And they're not even in the heat of the moment. They're speaking in the heat of the moment. They're not acting in the heat of the moment. The widespread confusion is just very frustrating, man. It makes this sport feel so silly sometimes. Well, because it's just ultimately the ABC, the Association of Boxing Commissions, just needs to get together and figure this out.
Could you imagine the Patriots are playing the Giants one week and there's a whole different set of rules in week 2 of the NFL season because the game is in New York, and then they travel to Arizona to play the Cardinals the next week, and it's a whole different set of rules for that? I mean, it seems ridiculous. This would never happen in a sport like that. I know there are some rules in the NFL that people dispute, and there are some confusion about like what's a catch and what's not, but at least it's the same rule set. At least it's the same damn black and white rules and regulations. It's not that way in MMA, and it's confusing for the fighters, well, confusing for the commentators, certainly, but more importantly, it's confusing for the fighters and sometimes even the referees. Even the referees, who it is their job to be the third man in the cage and enforce the rules in the cage. And if you were just at an event maybe a night before on a Friday and it's one set of rules, and the next night you're traveling to an event on a Saturday and it's a whole different set of rules, it can get confusing. You have to figure out if you're in a position where you got to figure out, well, what state am I in the moment? Like something's going on. Someone's about to knee a dude in the face. It's like life or death. And you got to think as a referee, wait, am I in New York or am I in Nevada? What? I mean, what are we talking about? It's completely ridiculous. Imagine trying to think that in the moment. It just makes my head spin. If you got to think about geography as there are two men beating each other to a bloody pulp in front of you there. It's insane.
Because the world, the best referees in the world, you're right, they travel several times a week. They're in one place on one day, they're in the next place the next day. They're in, I don't know. It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous, man. And we could talk about. I
need something to cool down my mind over here.
We could spend 20 minutes on this, but let's move on because we agree. The next question. Oh, this is a rough username. I don't even want to say this username. The next question comes MMA Would You Rather's from Torn Knee Ferguson. What's
Ouch.
happening? S&M podcast. I got a couple MMA Would You Rather's for you. Okay, so let's do this. I don't think we've done this before. Number one, Marc, would you rather the Diaz-Poirier winner or the Ferguson-Pettis winner get a title shot?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's hard to say. That's hard to say. I still think Tony Ferguson deserves some kind of title shot. I mean, he should still be the interim champion, right? He was kind of he blew his knee out. He tripped, and it was a horrible accident, and he lost the opportunity. He lost his interim belt. So as far as merit goes, you would say Tony Ferguson, if he were to beat Pettis, he should be the next guy in line. But we all know that's not how this goes in this sport. To be honest with you, it could be neither one of these four guys. It could be George St. Pierre getting the next title shot. It could be. It doesn't matter what happens in any of these. It could be all. It could be all moot. Could be GSP against McGregor or Khabib, depending on how that plays out. I think that it's so hard to say now at this point. I think we'd have to wait to see what happens in the fight. I think, as we've spoken about now for a few weeks, if Nate Diaz beats Poirier and McGregor beats Nurmagomedov, there's no way they're not doing McGregor-Diaz next. I mean, there's just no way. That's got to be the fight, no matter what. Tony Ferguson can do, a backflip off the cage and knock out Pettis with a knee, and it would probably still be Nate Diaz getting the title shot if we're being honest here. But I mean, gun to my head, if you're talking about who should really get it, probably Tony Ferguson if he were to beat Pettis.
Yeah. If the question is what would I rather, I mean, Tony Ferguson is ultimately the next man in line for me. If he's able to beat Anthony Pettis, he deserves that. I mean, he was the interim champion before he got that belt stripped because of injury he suffered. Forever, however silly that injury may be, he still suffered it in the middle of media obligations while promoting his fight. So he's the next man in line. But like you said, if Nate Diaz wins and Conor wins, regardless, if Nate Diaz wins, like he's going to get some kind of title shot. Next up, whether that's the title shot for the Conor belt or the lightweight belt, doesn't matter. Next up is if Darren Till misses weight, would you rather a non-title fight between Till Woodley or a Woodley Usman title fight? I would say that I would rather the title fight still take place, a Woodley Usman title fight, just so we can get some progression in that division. But I mean, Tyron's already said that he's not going to accept that, so I don't know how realistic that would be. But if it's up to me, I would like that.
I would want whatever it is that Woodley deems sufficient for him. He's the champion. If he makes weight, he should be in the driver's seat. He should be the one to decide what happens. People are not going to love that. If Till misses weight and Woodley chooses Till, people are going to be upset with Woodley. Big shocker. Fans upset with Tyron Woodley. I know. It's crazy to say, believe it or not. But I think that it should be up to Woodley. If he doesn't want to fight Usman, I cannot fault the man for that. I cannot fault the man for preparing for Darren Till, a giant, tall southpaw who hits like a truck, and then having to fight Kamaru Usman, who has an oppressive wrestling game, one of the best in the UFC, on a day's notice. I can't fault him for that at all. So I would say whatever Woodley deems like he wants to do, whatever he deems as a worthy opponent, if he's comfortable with fighting Usman, cool. If he thinks that he should fight Till because he's prepared for Till, I'm good with that. Yeah.
Next up, would you rather DC vacate the light heavyweight belt and have the UFC little 4-man tournament with the top four ranked light heavyweights to decide a new champ, or would you rather DC Gustafsson 2 at MSG?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to see him vacate the belt. I mean, if he is going to defend it, and he says he is, he keeps saying he's going to defend it before the possible Lesnar fight at heavyweight, then I don't see why he should vacate it. But I'm not in love. I mean, the tournament idea is like, I think it could be cool. It could be good in theory, but those things fall apart very easily. And I don't know. Again, if DC is going to defend it, he's going to defend it. I don't think it's going to be Gustafsson though. It just seems like he's not interested in that fight. And I don't know if that is a great MSG headliner, because those two guys didn't really draw the first time they fought. It was a great fight. Don't get me wrong. It was a fantastic fight, but it didn't draw all that well at all. And for MSG, as we've spoken about, that needs a top-notch, huge main event, and that would not fit the bill. But that main event is still wide open, and DC is available, so maybe that will happen just by default. But I don't think he does. It seems like from talking to him and hearing his quotes, doesn't seem like he really wants to fight the Mauler in that fight.
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, if you're just asking me if I was a fan and you're just asking what would I rather, of course I would rather like to see DC Gustafsson too. I mean, that was a great fight. I would like to see it played back one more time before DC exits. But I mean, would I rather, just on a general sense, on a general scale of considering, you know, these people's health and where they are in their career? I've said this a bunch, man. I don't want to see DC fight at 205 anymore, especially after what he looked like at heavyweight, especially after building his body back up for heavyweight. I think it would be very silly for him to cut down to 205. So I would rather he just either vacated that title or they just let him hold that title until January, and then he can ride off into the sunset with those two. Next up, would you rather Eddie Alvarez stay in the UFC or go back to Bellator? That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I want to see Eddie Alvarez versus Michael Chandler 3.
That's the answer.
And Chandler is going back to Bellator. He's staying with Bellator. So how about this? Eddie Alvarez signs a one-fight deal with Bellator. He fights Michael Chandler. It's an amazing fight. Like I said, I think I said last week that those two fights are two of my favorite fights of all time in MMA. And then he goes back to the UFC. I mean, I don't really mind. Again, I think we've spoken about Alvarez and his status over the last few weeks, and I'll say it again. Whatever is going to get Eddie Alvarez the most money, whatever it is that he thinks he deserves, wherever is going to treat him the best, that's where he should go. And I think that fans should be cool with that. And there are good fights for him in either place. So I'm cool with whatever he chooses, whatever is best for his family.
That was a great non-answer. I'm just going to go ahead and pick a side. I want Eddie Alvarez to go to Bellator because, like you said, whatever it takes to get Michael Chandler 3. If now that Michael Chandler has signed with Bellator, re-signed, that's where I want Eddie Alvarez. I need to see that fight one more time before these guys ride off into the sunset.
It may be a non-answer, but I think Eddie Alvarez deserves that choice. You know, that choice to go wherever is going to pay him more, and I'm cool with it either way. If that man gets paid, that man has been in some wars. That man is a legend as far as I'm concerned in the lightweight division, and wherever he's going to get paid, wherever he wants to go, I support that either way.
Yeah, I think I know where we're going to stand on this next one. We've talked about it a little bit before, but would you rather Rockhold and Romero both move up to light heavyweight or stay at middleweight? I think this is a simple answer for me. I think both those guys should go to light heavyweight. If you're a middleweight, especially a bigger middleweight, why would you not just go to light heavyweight? There is so much opportunity there. Just look at Anthony Smith, man. Within a matter of months, he is a top contender there. Go to light heavyweight. The door is open. The window is open for success there.
When I saw that the UFC was trying to book Rockhold back at 185 against Weidman and Romero back at 185 against Costa, I put my head in my hands. I was like, what are we doing here? What are we doing? Why do we continue to try to force these hard weight cuts? It's so damn frustrating. We were just talking about it with Darren Till, who admittedly should not really be in that welterweight division, yet he's being given a title shot. So of course, if you're given a title shot, what are you going to do? Say, no, I don't want the title shot. I'm gonna move up and wait. It's ridiculous. I think that Rockhold and Romero should move up yesterday. Romero, first of all, can't make the weight. He's missed weight twice in a row. There's no reason why he should be going back to 185. There are way more opportunities for him at 205 anyway, once he gets healthy and he heals his broken orbital, the surgery on his eye. I think that he could be a monster at 205. I think he would be. DC's retiring. DC's gone in March. That division is wide open. Romero could be the champion next year. Who knows? So I think 205 is great for him. He can't make 185 anymore. He's missed twice in a row. Rockhold. He's been complaining about the weight cut for years. He said after his last fight, that's it, against Romero. He said, that's it, I'm going to 205. Now all of a sudden he's going back to 185 to fight Weidman. He's another guy. He's a very tall guy. I mean, he's cutting too much weight. I don't think he can take punches as well at 185 anymore because he's not fully hydrated. I think he should go to 205, and he's the same type of deal, man. When he gets to 205, he is a very, very dangerous guy in that weight class. He's top 5 probably automatically, and also potentially a future champion. I don't get it. I don't get why we're trying to get these guys back to 185. Go up a weight class, feel better, fight better. Everyone's better off for it.
I'll add too to what you're saying, because both of the matchups that they've gotten, Rockhold obviously getting the Wyman rematch, and then Romero getting Costa, neither of those really do anything for either of them, right? Like, who was asking for Rockhold Weidman too? Like, that's a great fight. I'll enjoy watching that fight. But ultimately, what does that do for Luke Rockhold? Get him closer to the middleweight title picture? Is that what he's trying to do? I agree with you. I mean, and same with Costa and Romero. Like, what does beating an up and coming Costa do for Yoel Romero? Dude, Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith were two like fringe top 10 middleweights who are already in like really high profile contendership fights at 205. Like, it seems so obvious right now that there is so much opportunity there. I just do not understand. Last up for this question, would you rather Horiguchi stay in Ryzen or go to the UFC and rematch DJ or fight Cejudo for the title?
That's a good question. I'm enjoying Horiguchi's Ryzen run a whole lot, and now he's going to be fighting Tenshin Nasukawa in a kickboxing match, which should be all kinds of bananas later on this year. I don't know, man. I think it seems like from what everyone has said that Horiguchi's making a nice amount of money in Ryzen. He's a main event guy in Ryzen. He's like their guy. I mean, he's one of their big stars, and it seems like he's getting paid in that manner by Ryzen. Whereas if he goes to the UFC, he's just another guy, and he won't get paid like that. He'll get paid, you know, a mid-level purse like other guys in the 125-pound division. Also, he's fighting a few pounds heavier in Ryzen, which I think is beneficial to him as well. He just looks so good. I mean, I think he fought Johnson too early the first time.
Oh yeah,
I don't think he was ready for that. But for my money, that guy is certainly a top 5 flyweight in the world, and maybe even a top 3 flyweight in the world. And I would love to see him fight in the UFC again and see how good he really is. We may never find out in Ryzen how good he really is, but if he's making a good amount of money and he's putting on exciting fights and he's able to feed his family that way, can't really fault him for wanting to stay where the money is.
Yeah, you know, you said he's maybe top 5, top 3. I was going to say the exact same thing. In my mind, he is a top 3 flyweight right now. I think it's Cejudo, DJ, and him in some order. He's like you said, he's the star of Ryzen at this point. He is one of their poster childs. He is one of their faces. He's getting paid well. He has really nice sponsorships over there, like Beat sponsorships and all these various things. If I was him, I would want to stay in Ryzen. But again, this is selfish question of what would I rather. So I would much rather see him come back to the UFC. I would love to see how much he's actually grown against the DJs and the Cejudos of the world, because he was a very, very different fighter when he left compared to wherever he is now.
Let's move on now to our next question from the MMA Fighting comments section. From Dizzy Dwarf, Conor versus Khabib. What is better for MMA, a Conor win or a Khabib win?
That's an interesting question. I think it's actually funny because the user right underneath it, BCG347, kind of sums it up in a really nice way where, you know, a Conor win is better depending on how long he wants to keep doing this. If he wins and then he just rides back off into the sunset and that's it, that's the end of Conor, that's not good. That's not better for anybody. But if he wins and he'll stick around for a little bit, that just makes the next Conor fight even bigger. And then the next Conor fight even bigger. With each escalating win, it'll just get even crazier and crazier, and we can reach the levels that we reached with him before. But however, if Khabib wins and Khabib wins thoroughly, I do think then the UFC will have maybe not a first tier level draw star, but Khabib will certainly rocket himself up, I think, into that John Jones type of discussion where maybe he can pull like a 400 or 500,000 on a pretty regular basis. And that is pretty great at this point. So it really depends on how long Conor wants to stay in this.
Yeah, and I also think this question is what's better for MMA. I mean, I think what's better for MMA and what's better for the UFC, two different things in this case. And I agree with what you're saying. If McGregor wins and then decides to go rematch Floyd Mayweather, which could very well happen, I would not.
Don't do that.
What, you don't think that could happen?
I just don't even will it to existence. Come on.
I think that could happen. I really do. I think that McGregor wants that fight. I'm sure Mayweather wants it. It's another 9-figure payday for him, probably. I think that could very well happen. If McGregor beats Nurmagomedov, he can pretty much do whatever the hell he wants. He can do it. He can write his own story. I mean, he already can, honestly. But after losing to Mayweather, there were some limitations to what he could do. But if he beats Nurmagomedov, sky's the limit. He can go fight Pacquiao. Pacquiao's coming off a knockout win. People would buy that. People would buy that. People would buy him against Mayweather again. Maybe not 4.4 million. People would buy that. So I think it's two different things. I think probably, if I'm going to actually give a real answer to this question, I think probably Nurmagomedov winning is better for MMA. I think that if McGregor wins, it could be better for the UFC in a way, because I think he will eventually fight in the UFC again, McGregor. I mean, and he'll be just an enormous star, and the UFC would probably co-promote another Mayweather fight, and they co-promoted last year's Mayweather fight, and it ended up being their biggest financial year of all time, even though they didn't really have a huge pay-per-view outside of that one, because they were co-promoters in that fight. So I would say a McGregor win, to make a very, very long answer short, which I seem to do a lot on this chat. If McGregor wins, better for the UFC. Nurmagomedov wins, better for the sport of MMA.
I'm so thoroughly disgusted with you right now.
What did I say?
You're just willing this.
I'm sorry for being honest, Shaun. I'm sorry for keeping it real. It's too real for you.
You're just willing this Mayweather crap into existence.
I'm not saying I want it to happen, but I'm saying, you don't think he would do it? You don't think he would go back and fight Mayweather again? You don't think 3 million people would probably buy it?
No.
Definitely more than 2 million. Definitely more than 2 million.
I don't think 3 million people would buy that at all.
How many people would buy Maymac 2? How many people would buy that?
The way that first fight is looked at now is so weirdly different than it was like in the moment. Like, people look back at that as a circus now, man. Like, nobody's talking about that as an all-time great moment.
That's a circus when it was happening.
No, but in a different way. Like, it was an intriguing, entertaining circus. Now people, it's almost like I don't want to say it's like a badge of shame, but it's like looked at in a very strange downward way, where I don't think nearly as many people would be interested in that. Again, like, what's the lead up?
How many buys?
Unless there is something different. No,
how many buys?
Hold on, tough guy. Unless there's something different about it, where there's kicks allowed or whatever. God, I can't believe you got me talking about this. Unless there's something different about it, where there's like kicks allowed or there's some stipulation. If it's just a boxing match, what the hell? What's the lead up to that going to look like? We all know what that fight's already going to look like in an even more convincing way than we knew last time, man. Like that.
I'll tell you.
Tell me.
Mayweather will be older. McGregor will say,
"I had 1 year older."
Listen. Mayweather will be older. That'll be a big part of the promotion. He'll be older. He'll be, again, same thing. He won't have fought for a few years. McGregor will be riding high off the Khabib fight. This is only if he beats Khabib. People have a short memory. And McGregor will say, you know what? I beat him the first 3 rounds, maybe the first 4 rounds. I've changed my cardio now. I've got it all figured out. I've made adjustments. Now I know I can beat Mayweather. He's a year older. I'm still in my prime. I've made adjustments. I've done the boxing thing now. I know what I did wrong. Now I can go out. Now I know how I can beat this guy. I've already been in there. I've seen what he can do. I've seen everything. Now I can beat him. You're telling me that it wouldn't get 2.5 million buys? It wouldn't get 2.5 million buys.
It might get that many buys because just anything to do with either of those dudes will get buys, like regardless. But the novelty is gone. And that was the thing about the first fight that was so big, that made it so big, was the novelty. Like, no one knew. People had an idea of what it was going to look like, but no one actually knew what it was going to look like. Seeing Conor McGregor out there in a boxing ring with boxing gloves and boxing shorts and trunks, like that was the newness of that was a big part of the allure. That's all gone, man. Like, that's completely gone in a very in a way that it's not coming back. Like, I don't think that whatever that freshness is, that is long out the window, man. There's no way.
It'll still be the 3rd biggest pay-per-view of all time. It'll still be the 3rd biggest of all. Yes. I think it does more than 3 million buys again. I would bet you. Do I got to do a shoey again? Do we got to do a shoey bet if this happens?
Well, we don't need to do it. We'll do this bet, but we don't even need to because it's not going to happen. I am disgusted in myself.
I cannot say for sure.
I am disgusted in myself that you got me talking about this for like 3 minutes.
I don't know why, man. I don't know why. I think it's realistic. I think it could happen again. Look, you think Mayweather is gonna not do anything? You think he's just gonna ride off into retirement? No way. That's not his style. He's gonna come back and do something else. He's not gonna just be quiet. You think he's just gonna run his strip club in Vegas for the rest of his life? No, that man's gonna fight again, and it could very well be Conor McGregor again. Come on, man.
All right,
hard work.
Hard work. Jesus Christ. Can you imagine having to sit through another like week of those kind of
I'm ready. Let's do it. I'm all about it.
I hate you so much right now. We are moving on. Next question comes from
all work is what?
Next question. There's a lot of them today, so this will probably be the last one from MMA Fighting. Then we got to move to Twitter. This comes from Judo Joker, who wants to know JoJo 2.0. Joanne Calderwood has been a fan favorite for a lot of hardcore fans dating back to her Invicta days. Now that she's 2-0 with 2 finishes at 125, do you think she is a serious contender in that division? What do you think her win over the weekend shows?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a huge proponent of Calderwood at 125. I have been before there was a 125-pound division. I got a chance to sit down with Calderwood about 3 weeks ago at the UFC PI in Vegas, and she's just in a different point in her life. She's the weight cut is not a worry anymore. It's not a stress anymore. She's at the PI. She's doing a different level of strength and conditioning, a different level of nutrition now. She's at Syndicate MMA under coach Shaun Wood. She's really in a great place. And what told me that she was in a great place was not that she won the fight against Faria, but she was able to win by submission. This is someone who is known for her knees, for her elbows, for her violent standing up, for her Muay Thai. And before it's not that she was bad on the ground, but she didn't have any confidence on the ground in herself. And she had lost there in the past. And for her to beat Faria with a triangle submission off her back,
yeah,
just her ability to stay composed on the ground and not panic and not freak out and kind of bide her time and then get a submission off her back, that tells me a lot about where Joanne Calderwood is right now. And I do think that she is already a top 5 125er. And I saw someone the other day say, "Oh, 125 is a shallow division." It's not a shallow division. I think it's actually a super interesting, somewhat deep division in that Calderwood, I think, is a top 5 125er. You have Roxanne Modafferi, who is, by the way, at the same camp as Calderwood at Syndicate MMA. You have Sadara Eubanks. You have blonde fighter Caitlin Chikagian. You have, of course, the title fight coming up next week between Shevchenko and Montano. And then I think, of course, you have the eventual move of Joanna Jędrzejczyk to 125. And then you add her into the mix, and all of a sudden, you're talking about matchups like Jędrzejczyk versus Calderwood. Now we're talking about a really interesting division, but I think Calderwood will be in the mix at women's 125. I think she's already there, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think she, like you said, she's a top 5 125er right now. And I think 125 is obviously in its infancy in the UFC. I mean, it's been a division outside of the UFC for a long time, but it's in its infancy in the UFC. And that's really, once a division becomes a UFC division, that's when we really start to figure it out, right? Because that's when people start flocking to it. I think it's already deeper than 135, man. Like I think that in-between point, it's the same thing we always talk about with 65 with the men, where there's an in-between point where it's very hard for that 115 to 135 gap was so big, and there were so many women that fell between it. And poor Joanne Calderwood, I mean, we were saying this from the beginning when she was on The Ultimate Fighter. Like she was going into The Ultimate Fighter with a ton of hype from all her Invicta days. And for even then, it was so obvious, her having to cut weight over and over again on that show, that this is just not healthy for her, man. And it's the same thing that we have talked about on this show and in past shows, where it's the Dan Hooker thing or Robert Whittaker or Anthony Johnson or whoever you want to say. When you don't have to worry about cutting weight and the diet isn't the big part of your existence, like it's just not this cloud weighing over your head, and you can actually focus on training for an opponent, studying your opponent, getting better in the actual facets of the game that matter. That's a huge thing. That's a huge thing, both mentally and physically, to be able to get off your back. So I am really excited for this division to be here now for her. And like you said, the idea of like a Joanna Jędrzejczyk Calderwood fight at 125, all these other various fights like that, there are a lot of cool options there, and I'm excited to see where she takes this.
You could headline like a Europe like fight night with that fight, I think.
Oh, 100%.
That would be phenomenal.
All right, well let's move on to Twitter. We tons of questions today, so sorry if we're not getting to all of them. But let's move on to Twitter.
We can go a little longer today, right? There was no MMA Hour or MMA Beat.
Yeah, we can go a little long.
We're the workhorses of MMAfighting.com.
So first question coming from Twitter, it comes from Strike MX, who asks, true or false, Jose Aldo will fight for a belt again before he retires?
I'll say true. I think he looked great against Stevens last month in Calgary. I think it's a possibility. I'm gonna say true. I think there's a path for him, certainly, and with the way things work now in the UFC, he didn't say an undisputed title. It could be an interim title, so I would say true.
That's the thing. I'll say true too as well, just because he's already in line for that interim title shot. If it seems like Max Holloway's coming back relatively soon, and it seems like he's on the right track. But if anything goes awry there, Jose Aldo versus Brian Ortega is the fight. That's the fight to make. So he's already there. He may need to win one more if the Max Holloway situation resolves itself. But I firmly believe that he'll fight for a belt again before he retires.
Let's go to our next question from Tragic Bronson or something along those lines on Twitter.
Oh, loyal fan, loyal listener. We appreciate it.
Yeah, question every week. Thank you, Tragic. should refs start to assert themselves more often? When does a ref step in to take a position away or give a more obvious verbal warning? Figueiredo versus Moraga had 3 warnings for fingers in the eyes, 2 warnings for fence grabbing, all in under 2 rounds.
Well, I mean, I think there's a fine line, right? I in general, I like to see refs asserting themselves in the fight. They are the third man in there for a reason. They are the keepers of whatever kind of rule set we're under. And if at some point we have to make it so that cheating doesn't pay off. If you don't get a free eye poke and a free nut shot and a free this and a free that every fight, like there has to be some limit. So I do like to see refs step in, but I think there is a way to go overboard with it too, where if I can't remember, I wish I could remember the example, but there was an example recently where a ref was very, very involved. It was like a regular fight night and like a local ref, and he was way too involved with the position and telling guys to keep working when they were working and stuff. There is a way to go over bounds or out of bounds, I'm sorry, with it. But in general, I like refs to assert themselves in there and to take points after a warning or something like that. This should not be, again, that you get a free one of every one of these fouls.
It's so tough, and every fight is different, and the way that MMA works is that it's just a weird 360 degrees sport where things happen in every fight that are maybe different than what happened in the last fight. So it's hard to say definitively either way. Should referees take more of an initiative? I think that it really depends on the fight, depends on what happens in that fight. What the referees have to weigh when they are going to take a point or when they're going to give a warning, especially when they're going to take a point, is how much did whatever that foul was, how much did it really affect what is going on in the cage? If it had a pretty big effect, then you should take a point, or you should at least give a change of position to if someone is like gaining an advantage, an advantageous position by grabbing the cage, like I think Yoel Romero did that against Jacare, something like that, where hold on to the cage and then ends up on top. Absolutely, there's no reason why that person should be given that advantage. As far as points go, it's like referees are hesitant to do it because there's only 3 rounds in most fights, and if you take a point away from a fighter, that is a massive difference in how the fight could turn out by decision. And the referees, for the most part, most of them don't want to be that involved in what the result of the fight is. But in some cases, they really should have. They shouldn't have a choice. They really should just say, "This is ridiculous. It's been 3 eye pokes now. How many times are we going to let this guy do this? You got to take a point." So I would like to see them be more aggressive, especially with things like eye pokes, where that's serious business. Like if you poke someone in the eye one time, it could change the entire fight. A fence grab, for the most part, probably won't change the entire fight.
No,
But
I
literally,
don't know about that. I don't know about that.
most fence grabs in a vacuum, Shaun, like, are not going to change the course of an entire fight. It's not going to affect the well-being of your opponent.
I disagree.
Well,
if you're fighting Damian Maia and you're trying your ass off to not get taken down, and he's about to take you down, and you hold the fence, and then you can stay on your feet, like, that's a huge deal.
Agreed. And that's something where you're gaining or you're preventing a position by cheating. And yes, that's certainly something that deserves a warning or a point taken away. But what I'm saying is that if you poke someone in the eye one time, it could change the entire course of the fight, because that person, your opponent, could be debilitated. I mean, their health could deteriorate. They can't see. You kind of need your eyes in a fight. So one eye poke can change the course of the entire fight. You could be losing a fight, poke a guy in the eye, and end up winning the fight in the end. And at that point, the referee has to gauge effect, and there should be a point. Even if it's only one eye poke, if it affects the opponent that much, there should be a point taken away.
Yeah, I agree with you. So let's move on. Next question coming from Twitter. This comes from Cult Chalet. I don't know. I butchered the hell out of that. I'm just going to jump into it. Hey guys, if you could choose one ability of a UFC fighter for yourself, what would you choose, and from who? With kind regards. So I'll take this one first. I think I'm going to do two. If I could choose one ability. So I am not a professional athlete. So for me, none of this matters. I would either take the physique of like a giant heavyweight, just like a Francis Ngannou type, because that seems cool to walk around with in life. I don't have that. That seems very interesting to just experience in your life. Or I would take either maybe like the speed of Demetrius Johnson, something like that. That seems also very cool and could be very applicable to a lot of different interests.
I would probably take Conor McGregor's ability to make money. That would probably be for what I do in my life, because I'm not an athlete. I mean, look at me. That would be probably the most applicable. That would be the most practical. So that's probably what I would take.
For someone who's not an athlete, you seem to cut weight a lot, dude. You're just always in this sauna.
It's unbelievable. I'm actually kind of at the point of sweating in here because it's pretty warm today in LA, and I'm just like in this pod, and I'm starting to get a little claustrophobic. So we should probably start wrapping now. I'm just kidding. I'm fine. I'm good to go.
All right. Well, hey, next one's coming from Travis Ledbetter on Twitter, who asks, will Bellator's homegrown talent, Pico, Danis, Ruth, end their careers in Bellator like Michael Chandler, or move on to the UFC eventually? Should the UFC focus more on signing such prospects so early in their development? Thanks for the show. Hey, thank you for the question. What do you think, Marc?
It's a good question, and it's impossible to say because all those guys are different. Some of them could leave, some of them could stay. That's probably what is most likely going to happen. Some of them will probably stay for a while. Some of them may leave, for the UFC. As far as the UFC signing fighters at a lower level, at a more developmental level, they've started to do that a little bit more with like a Mackenzie Dern. They did that with Greg Hardy, I guess, is an example of someone who they've signed, who they've kind of signed and they're letting fight other places. So they're doing that a little bit more, but I think that Bellator is in a different position where they can. It's more important to them to do that. The UFC is the very pinnacle of MMA. I mean, there's no doubting that. I know that sometimes when you're watching a fight night on a Saturday and you see a fight on the prelims, you're like, this is not the pinnacle of MMA, but the UFC is still the pinnacle of MMA, and they are still, for all intents and purposes, the big leagues of MMA. So they're able to kind of pluck a free agent away when that free agent is actually ready to compete, like an Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez was the Bellator champion, becomes a free agent, the UFC picks him up, and it's happened many times before. So they don't mind letting guys get to that point and then taking them when they're at the highest level, rather than kind of developing them from the start. But also they've signed Sage Northcutt. They've also done some of that as well. So they're not opposed to it if the situation kind of needs that, if there is someone that they've located to do that with. But I think it's more important for Bellator to do that because Bellator is playing catch up. They're chasing the UFC. So if they can target some potential blue chip prospects at a lower level, and then wait for them to get older so they can become the next Tyron Woodleys and the Luke Rockholds and Dan Cormier's of the world, then it is to their benefit to do that.
Yeah, I know it's interesting you mentioned Eddie Alvarez because when he signed with Bellator way back in the day, he was already kind of a known commodity. He was already the underground king at that point. We knew that Eddie Alvarez was an elite talent. But as for, you look at a lot of the younger prospects that Bellator is homegrown, they don't really let most of them go, man. I can't honestly. I was thinking while you were talking, I can't think of one that they've let go. They generally do a very good job of instilling loyalty in these guys, of keeping them wanting to represent the Bellator brand. Where I can understand that. Where if someone came to me when I was that young in my career, just starting out, and showed faith in me and supported me the whole way through, at some point when it comes time to make that decision, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, you were with me when I wasn't anything. Now I'm going to be with you. So I would be surprised if they lose a lot of these guys to the UFC, the Aaron Picos and the Ed Ruths. I mean, they've been on them from the beginning. And I think in general, I mean, this is just me as a spectator, maybe observing this, but it seems as though Bellator's strategy of doing this, of picking these guys out before they even start really, and then supporting them the whole way, has forced the UFC to sort of react in the way that you said, where now with the Mackenzie Derns of the world or the Greg Hardys of the world, they're going out and finding these guys and girls much younger in their career and signing them to these developmental deals so they can at least keep them away from Scott Coker and Rich Chow and these guys over at Bellator who would jump on the chance to get a Mackenzie Dern or something like that.
Moving on to our next Twitter question from Ben Gisby. Speaking of Bellator, Gallagher's loss has some people lamenting kicking a 21-year-old kid when he's down because he was a heel. I love heels, Macho Man, Rick Rude, etc. But they are no fun if we rationalize their shtick. Let them be hated. They don't need our defense. Thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I said a little bit about this last week, but I'll reiterate. I was a little surprised, I guess, with the reaction to I'm sorry, not James Vick, but I guess James Vick too. James Gallagher. To his loss of people getting mad at all the reveling that was generally going on amongst the fan base. That's what happens, man. You talk shit. If you lose, people are going to talk shit right back at you. That's just generally how the fight game works. None of this is new here. Ultimately for him, I will reiterate what we said last week. I would like to see him go back to 145. He was doing really well at 145. I think the move to 35 was a mistake. And maybe now that he's gotten this out of the way, I would like to see him go back to 45 in the future.
Definitely agree on him being a 45er. And for the whole heel thing, I mean, that is the whole point. I mean, it's not pro wrestling, it's MMA, as much as I may want it to be both. But that's the whole thing is if you're going to be a heel, the point is you want people to buy your fights or you want people to come watch you, and you want people to, like, when you're a heel, the point is you want to motivate people to invest in you losing. That's kind of what a heel is. You're the bad guy, so you want people to turn in so the good guy can win. So I do understand what Ben is saying on Twitter, and I don't disagree. But it's not pro wrestling, and heel is a pro wrestling term. And James Gallagher may be playing a heel, but he's still a fighter and he's still a human being. He's not a character. He's a real person. So I do understand why he would be kind of crapping on him, but like you said, that is kind of the bed that he made for himself. And if you're going to talk that way, and that's going to be the way that you promote fights, people are going to watch fights to see you get beat up. People are going to watch that fight to see you get knocked out. That's why they want to watch, because you're talking that much crap. I got news for everybody. Floyd Mayweather is not popular because people love him. Some people love him, but a lot of people want to watch his fights to see him get knocked out. That's a little truth for you there, right? I mean, people ordered Maypac because they thought Manny Pacquiao was going to knock Mayweather out. Finally, someone's going to come in and knock out Mayweather. I think they probably thought the same thing about McGregor. McGregor is going to finally come in. He's going to knock out Mayweather, and that didn't happen. But that's the whole point. And same thing for McGregor in many ways. I think people are watching his fights because he's hated, but hated in a way where you want to watch his fight because you want to see them get their comeuppance. So if that's the way Gallagher is promoting himself, that's all well and good. But we also have to remember this is not completely pro wrestling, and that he is still a kid. He's 21 years old, and we do have to kind of think of it that way too. But if that's how he's gonna go about his own promotion, he's gonna promote himself that way, then there will be consequences in that regard.
Yeah, and I mean, it's obviously worked, right? Like he's a 21-year-old eliciting that kind of reaction for his first loss. It's on some degree that what he's done has worked. So hey, man, more power to him. Keep it going. Keep on moving on to the next one. This one comes on from Twitter, or on Twitter from Joshua Rittenhouse, who asks, "What fight is going to be more enjoyable to watch? Not the popular vote, no bandwagons. Which one of Nate versus Dustin or Khabib versus Conor will be a possible fight of the year?"
Well, I mean, that's impossible to say, right? I mean, who knows? I think that if you're someone who likes stand-up wars, you'll probably get that in Poirier versus Diaz. I think that it's really all about what kind of fight you like. I mean, I think there are people who may like to see Conor knock out Khabib. People would love to see that more than watching, Nate versus Poirier. People maybe would love to see Khabib destroy McGregor's face like he's promised to do. People may like that the most. But as far if you're really into stand-up wars and you're just an MMA fan and you have no allegiances to any of these guys, probably Diaz Poirier will be a more fun fight if you like that kind of style of fight.
See, I don't know. I disagree. I think maybe on a rewatch, obviously this is ridiculous because neither of them happened, but on a rewatch, Nate Dustin probably will be the better fight. But live and seeing it for the first time, the anticipation and whatever that feeling is, the tension in the air while you're watching a fight like Conor versus Khabib, especially after I'm sure what will be a long and very thorough lead up full of lots of trash talk. And by the time we get there, we will reach some sort of fever pitch. I'm sure the tension in that arena for however long that fight goes, we'll both be there, will be ridiculous, will be unreal. Like that was the one thing about Diaz versus McGregor too. Like when we saw that live, the tension in that arena was just absurd. Like when you don't know the result and you're watching something like that you've anticipated so much, I think even if it's boring, unless it's like a Derek Lewis and Ngannou type of boring, it's still going to be just fascinating to watch. So I would pick that one.
I agree with you. That's a good point. That level of tension and promotion can, like you said, make even a tactical fight seem like the most exciting fight in the world.
Yeah.
Next question from the Twitter. From Darby Crash. Where is Ryan Hall? Does he still fight for the UFC? Where is Ryan Hall?
That's a good question.
Ryan Hall, where are you? Where are you, bro?
He's still a UFC fighter. He still wants to fight, as far as I know. I think maybe like a month ago, he said on Twitter that he had a fight, and then that was the end of that. That's a good question. We should look into that. Mark, let's look into that.
Yeah, we'll look into that. He's still a UFC fighter, and like you said, he did say he has a fight, and I've also heard that he has a fight. I don't know when, I don't know where, I don't know who, but I feel like he'll probably fight before the end of the year.
Yeah. It would be good to have him back. There's not many guys like him. He's a very unique type of a character, whereas a lot of times these fight nights, we get a billion people in a row who are basically creative characters. He's someone that you definitely know when a Ryan Hall fight is going on. So that'll be, hopefully we can get him back. Let's see. Let's start wrapping things up here. This one's coming from Jen on Twitter, who writes, thoughts on the mental warfare between Conor and Khabib so far? Any idea where and when the press conference for those two will take place? Also, why didn't the UFC put Artem on UFC 229 and have it be Ireland versus Russia? Why in Canada? I'm not sure I got the end part, but what do you think so far on the mental warfare between Conor and Khabib and all this?
Par for the course. I think McGregor is trying to do what he always does, and he's trying to get under Khabib's skin. I think a few weeks ago now, that photo with Vladimir Putin was directed right toward Khabib and trying to get under his skin, trying to engage in like Jen said, the mental warfare. The stuff last week about Khabib's dad being a quivering coward was just kind of weird. I don't know where that came from. I don't know where like it didn't really make sense to me, but obviously Khabib's dad is someone that's very important to him, and he's been very adamant about trying to get his dad a visa into the country so he can be cornered by him at UFC 229. So I think Conor was just kind of picking that scab as he does, and I think that's just par for the course for a McGregor fight. And Khabib doesn't really do the mental warfare thing so much, but he's saying that he's going to rearrange Conor's face. He's going to ruin his face. He's going to, do all these things. So, I mean, I think this is just standard but also make no mistake. There is a very, very real tension, a very, very real, I don't know if I would go as far as say hatred, but certainly there is a dislike between the two camps. There's certainly a situation where if they're both together in the same place, it could go off pretty quickly. It could kind of ignite. And I think they're gonna do some kind of press conference before fight week. I don't know when that's gonna be. I keep hearing stuff about maybe in 2 weeks. When, I don't know. I imagine it'll be in like New York or LA or Vegas. But nothing's official on that yet. But they have to do something where they get in the same room, right, before fight week. That is like, I mean, that is a scary proposition because things could go very badly. I mean, both those guys and their camps have that ability, as we know. I mean, we're talking about Conor throwing a dolly through a bus window. So cooler heads probably will not prevail. Anyway, moving on to the next part.
Hold on. I didn't even get to say a word there. Calm down, tough guy. Jesus Christ, Marc.
Call me tough guy.
Hey, you're just bullying along. I will add just a little bit because I mean you said most of it there, but the trash talk with Khabib's father, I think that was interesting because that was almost like that's very par for the course of Conor, where maybe that doesn't make sense to us, but to him, it's a very inside thing, right? Like if you remember the lead up to the Floyd fight, and I can't believe we keep talking about Floyd, but like him wearing the CJ Watson jersey, like that was a very subtle jab. And for a while, like Draymond Green thought it was his jersey. Like Conor is pretty, he's pretty smart with the way he attacks his opponents in the mental warfare. So I'm sure that father bit, there was something behind it that maybe we don't know about, but maybe Khabib knows about it or somebody in his team knows about. So it's going to be as soon as UFC 228 is over, it seems like the UFC is waiting for that to pass. And then I'm sure they're going to go full blown into 229, and we're going to start getting the lead up to this that I think people are already kind of craving. Like I'm already getting a lot of questions about like, when's this start? When is this going to start? This doesn't feel like it's a big fight yet. Patience, guys. It's coming.
Gunny Nelson, Shaun?
What's up?
Where's Gunny Nelson at? From Jen's question on Twitter. Where's Gunner?
I do not know offhand. Do you?
I believe he was injured, right? I think is he recovering from an injury?
I would have to look that up.
Yeah, he was gonna fight Magny. Remember, he was gonna fight Magny in Liverpool.
You're right.
And then I'm pretty sure he's recovering from an injury. Why didn't the UFC put Artem on UFC 229? I mean, I don't think. I mean, that I don't think the UFC wants to do Artem any favors. I think that they were pissed at him, right, about the whole dolly to a bus incident, even though he wasn't the guy who threw the dolly to the bus. And I don't think they're going to do him any favors and put him in a position where he could get the most buzz, most likely. Although, I mean, him being on the roster at this point is like, all right, we're going to keep Artem around, but they're not going to do him any favors.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's start winding down, but let's get one more question from Twitter at least. This one's coming from Abdul Rahman, who says he's a big fan from Saudi Arabia. How likely is it that Conor will grab Khabib's belt at the press conference?
Well, I think if Conor were to grab Khabib's belt, the fight would probably break out on the day.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what to expect when those guys are in the same room. They haven't been in the same room since Brooklyn. So all bets are off, man. It's a legitimate combustible situation, but I think both guys know they're going to get paid a crap load of money in a few weeks. So I don't think it will get physical to the point where the fight is going to be in danger. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. But if that were to happen, it would be Jose Aldo times 100 because Khabib ain't taking that. I'll tell you that.
They're going to need a lot of security for that press conference. A lot of security.
Yeah. You have anything else you want to get to before we get out of here?
Let's just do our promo segment.
All right.
What do you got?
All right, I will go.
What do you got?
Let's see. So this isn't anything new, but this was maybe my first experience with this in a while. So I'm gonna talk about a little bit about this. Last weekend, I was in Oceanside for a little mini vacation. I mean, that was my first vacation of the year. I had a really great time. I wish I was still there, honestly. The beach is my spirit animal. I want to go back. But because I was gone, I missed the live experience of UFC Lincoln. It was the first time in a long time that I can remember, actually, that I didn't like cover a UFC event live. So it's maybe old news to some people, but this was a relatively new experience for me. It was a solid card. I never want to miss a Justin Gaethje fight, so I was pretty proud of myself. I stayed off of spoilers all weekend and did so successfully off of social media. So Monday morning, I wake up and I pop on UFC Lincoln prelims and just take the plunge on DVR, obviously, so I can skip all the crap. But man, you don't realize it until you do it. Like, we talk about all the filler a lot, all of the ads and promos and cuts to the studio and all this crap. But holy crap, man, it took me maybe like 2.5 hours to get through all of UFC Lincoln, a 10-hour broadcast. I was able to bust through it in like 2.5 hours, just ripped right through it. And you know what, man? Like, it was super, super enjoyable. And I think that's one thing that struck me the most is in the middle of these 10-hour slogs, it really becomes not fun at some point, right? Like, it becomes a job. At no point during this brief 2.5 hours did my eyes glaze over and I was wondering what the hell led me to this place. Like, it was really enjoyable, and I felt like I was watching a real sport, what I came there to see. It was nonstop action. It was things going on rather than, again, this marathon that we've just basically become used to and accustomed to. And frankly, it kind of pissed me off because this sport is inherently a ridiculously fun viewing experience. It's a freaking fight, for God's sakes. But I feel like it has become so sullied by the broadcast pacing, the absurd broadcast pacing of Fox Sports 1. I know, I mean, I've heard things probably are going to change. Hopefully, when they move to ESPN next year. I really hope that's true. And I just want to join the chorus and say, and that time cannot come soon enough, because when you don't have to experience it and you can actually go back to what these fights should be, which is just watching fights as opposed to feeling obligated to, it is a much more enjoyable experience.
Well said. Well said. Shaun, what was the biggest combat sports event of last weekend?
What was it?
Wasn't UFC Lincoln. It was KSI versus Logan Paul. Now, I'm gonna stay off the bat. I did not watch this fight. I had no interest in this fight, but 800,000 other people did watch and paid for it. $10. They paid to watch KSI versus Logan Paul, two YouTube stars, compete in a boxing match with headgear in England. And it was a massive success, obviously, at the box office. It was a massive success on pay-per-view, and it owned the day on social media. Everyone was talking about it on social media in the afternoon on Saturday. And it kind of, and again, I had no interest in it. And that's just me. I don't care. I don't know who those guys are. I really knew nothing about KSI or Logan Paul heading into that fight. So I had no investment and I had no really care to watch it. But it kind of underscores what we've talked about, Shaun, about fights are only big fights. Fights are only relevant to most people if there's some kind of investment in who the fighters are. KSI and Logan Paul are not even fighters, right? They're YouTube personalities, I guess. I mean, I barely know what they do, but a lot of people know them. A lot of people follow their careers in a completely different medium and were willing to plunk down their hard-earned money in droves to watch these two guys fight. And I think that's a good lesson for combat sports, and it's a good lesson for us and for the fans of MMA and boxing, that people don't just watch fights because there are fights on. People don't just watch fights because there are exciting fights on. Exciting fights don't necessarily get the majority of people into it. They're not invested in just watching an exciting fight. But what does get people invested is that connection to a fighter. Even if it's KSI, even if it's Logan Paul, two guys who can't fight. I mean, they did fine, I guess. I didn't watch. Again, I don't care. But a lot of people did care. And that care is what makes or breaks a big fight, what makes or breaks a pay-per-view. And I think we need to start realizing that more, especially in this era where there are so many fights. There are so many fights, so many cards. The most important thing for combat sports and for the viewing experience is for fighters and promotions to build some kind of investment in the fighters, not the production, in the fighters. If you care about these fighters, you're going to watch them, even if they're not fighters. And KSI versus Logan Paul proved that.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, the pay-per-view numbers on that thing kind of blew me away, to be honest.
I barely knew that it was happening. And I was on Twitter on Saturday and I just saw all this stuff and I was like, what is this? And I didn't care enough to watch it, but it did extremely well. And it's what we talk about, man. It's like, there needs to be a better job by promoters to get people invested in the fighter, market the fighter. And not every fighter is marketable, but again, that is the key. That is the key to making the most money in combat sports. Not great fights, but exciting, interesting fighters.
Absolutely. Well, hey, this has been another episode of the MMA Fighting A-Side Live Chat podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, a replay of this podcast is going to be up immediately on YouTube following the show. And later today on SoundCloud, it will be up as well. Like I said, next month, it looks as though we're going to be on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher. So keep an eye out for that. Also, next week, we're not sure yet whether we're going to be able to do a show. I'll be in Dallas for UFC 228. So if you would like us to do a show, maybe on Tuesday, I don't know, we haven't figured it out yet. But if you want us to do maybe an early show, let us know. Hit us up and we'll do whatever you guys want to do. Again, this is your show. But in the meantime, it's been really fun once again hanging out with all y'all on this Wednesday morning. My name is Shaun Al-Shatti for Marc Raimondi. This has been the A-Side Live Chat podcast on MMA Fighting. Have a good week, guys.
Let me break in before we leave. 2 hours ago, Logan Paul tweeted, "The thought of securing a fight in the UFC is exciting. Could finally use my wrestling background." This is the world we're in right now.
And that's how we out. Thank you so much, guys.